Welcome back to another episode, our second episode of season 4, Parallel Barking.
Woof, woof. Are you going to start counting all year?
Bark, bark. No, I won't. That I was just thinking that would be terrible. That would be a bad
Oh my
idea.
God.
But number 2 isn't terrible. I can do that. I'm Ariana Backer. Arf, arf.
Woof. Larry
I'm
Backer,
here
woof,
with
woof.
my
Welcome back.
co-host. What's your name?
I told you,
Did you?
but Larry Backer,
All right.
let's get on with the business.
Oh my God. If you would stop interrupting.
I'm feeling electrified today.
Oh, wow. What a great segue. Thank you. Thank you so much. Today we're going to talk about South Africa. Things have been heating up. Well, maybe not, actually. That was a terrible pun. Because things have gotten a little serious in South Africa lately. Since actually 2007, there has been an energy crisis. And most people know this in South Africa. If you don't, now you do.
And we're focusing primarily here on the electrical grid.
We are. The troubled state-owned power utility, Eskom.
Now you sound like a reporter for
It produces about 95% most of the country's electricity. What's happening right now is it's implementing blackouts.
But continues to implement blackouts.
And it's continuing blackouts. And what
but let's call them what they're calling it.
They're calling it load shedding.
Load shedding.
Load shedding.
I love euphemisms, especially administrative euphemisms.
Yes. I mean, the first time I heard this, I
thought you were talking about a snake.
I didn't know in what context it was meant.
Or you were engaging in potty humor.
Yes, exactly. That is exactly what I thought.
My God. So yeah, the South Africa electrical grid is now joining the lexicon of potty humor jokes.
Well, I mean, it is
coal-fired. It is shedding its load. All right, but anyway.
Okay, so there are different stages to these blackouts. They can be for different amounts of time, and they're like stage 5, stage 6, and apparently, for instance, stage 6 is that businesses and homes go without electricity for more than 10 hours a day. And stage 5 is when they go for up to 8 hours a day without.
It almost sounds like you're talking about cancer. But it's good that I'm always pleased when administrators globally, because there's this global administrative culture, I don't care where you are, where they like to borrow the imagery and the signification from other and related fields. And in this case, there's a bit of irony that the administrators for administrative speech are borrowing the language of medicine, and in this case, the high fatality rate medicines of cancer. So we're in stage 5 or 6, and probably it can go up to stage infinity.
Yeah,
that's they can parse it out. But yeah, no, and they've got this down to a science. It's been almost half a generation now that they've been doing this. This has become the normal, and that's what makes this really interesting.
Well, I think in recent days, it's being it's coming to a head because of how high these stages have reached. It's come to a people
right.
are
right. a point at which the administrator's capacity to maintain stability and order and to manage the masses into being quiet and just grumbling is probably going to be less and less successful, and there'll be an explosion somewhere. It's the fear.
Well, yeah. I
And
mean,
I don't mean an explosion of the electrical plant.
how could there be? How
Uh,
could there be? I mean, it's
yeah.
not only loss of electricity, because I mean, without electricity, you don't have water.
Well, and you don't have
Energy.
business and you don't have jobs, right? And the
Right, you're
cascading
losing
effects on
your
the economy.
economy. Think about if you don't have electricity all day long, your economy is going to shrink, and
Now,
it
yeah.
has already at least 0.7% in
Well,
the
and even
quarter.
if it doesn't shrink, the load shedding policy, especially one that's now what almost 20 years old in its current form, also tends to be destabilizing. Even if you don't have a crisis, the instability that it causes in the ability of South Africa to continue to be the economic engine for at least the southern part of the continent becomes more and more imperiled. That's an opportunity, of course, for Nigeria and for West Africa to take a dominant role away from the southern cone of Africa as they descend. But all of this was, in a sense, preventable. I did a little bit of looking. There's some background that's worth looking at, and this has its origins not in 2007, but apparently at the very start of the post-apartheid government, in flush with possibilities and hope and everything, there was what has become a very at least well-known or somewhat well-known analysis that was prepared in December of 1998 for ESCOM that effectively predicted that the company that was running the electrical grid would run out of power reserves by 2007. Right. So this is 1998, 2007, and that they suggested, and you can quibble about, how you could tweak the suggestions, but at least they made the suggestion, hey, look, it's 1998, we got until 2007. We really need to do something to augment and improve supply, and not just supply, but supply and reliability. Because like an automobile, an electrical system and their plants tend to deteriorate over time, and they have to be maintained, and at some point they have to be replaced, and your kind of smorgasbord of energy producing coal,
I
oil,
know where this is
nuclear.
going.
Where's it going? But
That's when they started the load shedding.
that's when they started the load shedding. Right. And so what wound up happening actually with the report, everyone said, wow, this report was really good. And the government did nothing. And at the time, it was reported that the government did nothing because they were thinking about privatizing the company, and they were thinking that they really didn't need to do very much. And so there was some smallish permission to increase production until 2004, when larger permission was granted. But by that time, other things started happening, and nothing really wound up occurring. Mm-hmm. But then, all right, so that gets you to the load sharing, and in a sense, can produce a kind of stable regime of instability where you've got load sharing and eventually a government that has the funds to deal with this. Eventually will turn their attention to this because a lot of people are going to start complaining at all class levels, from your entrepreneurs to just working people who need a job. But then a couple of other things have been going on. The South African government has itself appears to be the politics of South Africa has become much more dynamic and to some extent much less stable. And two things have started to have an additional and a leveraging effect, which is moving us to stage 6, 7, and who knows, maybe stage 10. One of them is corruption within the system, and the other is crime, and the other one is economic instability. The corruption is South Africa is like a number of other countries, in the midst of dealing with a significant challenge of corruption at every level of the operation of the state and outside of the state. Their inability to deal with it effectively has repercussions on the economy generally, but in this case has significant repercussions on the ability of the grid operators to actually work effectively. More interesting still is the synergy. That when you think about criminality, you think, well, okay, everyone says when you've got a stage 6 load sharing, there's no electricity for 10 hours, so criminals are going to go around a darkened city and rob people or do all kinds of other nefarious things, and they do. But that's not the interesting part of the criminality. Apparently, criminality also occurs in this case, where they go into power stations that are closed and start effectively dismantling it to steal parts for sale in other markets. And that is, in a sense, a sign of desperation. And it has a spiraling effect on the ability of the system to recover. And you've got to have a little bit of sympathy for people. I mean, people got to do what they got to do in order to survive, but that makes a bad situation worse. So you've got criminality, the usual quote unquote criminality, but also it's mostly metal theft. To then go in secondary markets, and of course corruption. And then the last thing, because of all of this instability, there's been both labor trouble and corruption-induced effectively extortion in certain areas and in certain sectors of the grid. And as a result of this, either as part of labor action or as part of criminal activity, there's been what has been reported I think since 2021 as sabotage of the plants. So you're making bad things worse. So you put all of this together and you've got a plant that, and you've got a grid system that is not just vulnerable, but whose vulnerabilities then exacerbate the difficulties. The result is, welcome to the 21st century. All of a sudden, something that you would think would have been fairly well protected and fairly off limits, given its substantial importance, is not to the point where the government, I think, has called in the military now to either operate or to somehow protect the integrity of at least portions of the electrical system, right? So that makes this interesting. What makes it more interesting, however, is the similarity. South Africa is not unique. And the vulnerability of electrical grids, the harvesting or the reaping of the inattention to electrical grids, especially that most countries have not really paid maybe as much attention as they should, is likely to show up in a bunch of other places. And so when you look at South Africa, you go, wow, this is like almost an ideal case of if things can go wrong in a country that is even though it's got a lot of challenges on its way up, how does it manifest? Can it manifest itself in other places? And one of them, for example, is in the United States, where the vulnerability of the electrical grid has been shown even by lone people who just have a hankering for destroying electrical substations that then trigger regional or local blackouts. We saw that in Oregon recently.
Yes, I've
there's been a testing of
myself.
this, right? And then we've got the Europeans, the huddled masses of the Europeans, who for a while, it didn't happen for all kinds of reasons, some of which will land people at the lowest reaches of hell in the context of the Russian-Ukrainian war. But there was a fear, for example, that there'd be rolling blackouts in Europe because having decided that they were going to strip themselves of nuclear power generation ago, and having thought that they could anchor themselves in this deeply intertwined system of gas, which is cleaner than coal or petroleum, and having not invested enough money in climate sensitive alternatives, solar, hydroelectric, and the like. They found themselves in a situation where electrical security was now threatened by foreigners in the context of conflict that technically was outside their borders, but then can have significant effects. And so one of the interesting things about the South African situation, which is bad and is unique in its own right, given its context and the history of South Africa and the like, but you can generalize a little bit, or you can draw insights from there. One of them is the neglecting both the strategic and operational importance of an electrical grid system, and especially in the context of not just political stability, but of moving towards self-sustaining climate-sensitive technologies, not investing money. And in South Africa, it was worse than that. It was just, this stuff will last forever. And there are any number of countries that are doing that the repercussions can be significant. And they'll show up in different ways in different places, but rolling blackouts may be in everyone's future, because there isn't a country on earth that has not kind of said, well, the lights are still working, so maybe we'll use this money for something else. Well, we're still getting coal, or, the plant's still working and it hasn't dropped, to the ground, so maybe we can put this off for a year or two, forgetting that it takes, and now with environmental legislation and the like, it takes a long, long time to build power generating infrastructure that is sensitive to environmental concerns, and environmental concerns that now increasingly have domestic and international law and norms behind them.
I mean, the African National Congress, one of their proposals, actually their only proposal, was to move from the state-owned stations to a privately owned renewable
Really?
form of
So
energy.
they've time
No. But
they-
listen,
they-
you can't use.
wait, they're time traveling. All right.
Listen,
Right.
but the great part about that is that it's owned by the president's billionaire brother-in-law, Patrice.
Cool. All right. So you got two things. You got time travel back to the 90s with the privatization as the panacea solution for everything. And it's not always clear that privatization, oh yeah, let's just give it, let's just devolve the operation of this thing to private entities, which will look, in terms of their human power, suspiciously like it did when it was owned by the state. So it's basically, the solution to this problem is we're going to transfer capital ownership of an entity. And that's like magic. I love that kind of magic. But there again, you have structural corruption, which is as interesting as it was applied. And again, this is time traveling back to the 90s in the Eastern Europe, when it de-Sovietized, and I know that's not a word, but moved away from the old Soviet and socialist state ownership to privatization. That was a 90s thing. The level of corruption and therefore mismanagement and inefficiency produced a number of lessons that you would have thought that, sitting from the vantage point of 2023, everyone, including our friends in South Africa, might have profited from. But of course, the profiting that appears to be in the forefront may not be focused on lessons learned. On the other hand, maybe they can get this right. I doubt it, but maybe they can get this right. But still, most bureaucracies, and certainly all politicians, would tend to kind of, ooze to the most bang for the buck for the least effort. And for a state like South Africa, which is even more ironic since they're now heavily involved with the state capitalist enterprises of the Belt and Road Initiative. They are deeply embedding with Chinese and development-oriented perspectives, and have been one of the leading members of the post-colonial developing state groups. To begin to sound like a shill for quote unquote 90s Washington consensus solutions is just interesting. But there you have it. And given that, one can't believe that they mean it as they said it, or if they did, they're just putting this off and then finding a series of sacrificial victims in the form of some fool who would take this. Unless they're living in Dubai and there's no extradition treaty, who could then be blamed conveniently, and then government officials and the administrative bureaucracy can avoid blame. That's also an old game, but one that's well played by most bureaucracies. Apparently, even in the most capacity needy states, the one thing that most states seem to have an enormous, or their administrations have an enormous capacity for, is learning the art of avoiding responsibility. And that they're all at the top of their class, which is a pity. But there it is. On the other hand, this problem is going to hurt. The solution for this problem is going to hurt because it's going to require resources, capacity, substantial structural and government
that's been the big problem,
management,
lack of
cultural
investment.
changes. Say what?
That's been one of the bigger problems, lack of investment in.
Well, I wouldn't invest in a company whose structural integrity I'm not absolutely sure of, and given the fairly large and sequential number of scandals with respect to the governance, public and private, in South Africa, companies
You don't
wary.
necessarily need to.
But there's always a Chinese.
The company, you need to invest in the infrastructure.
But there's always a Chinese, and what may happen, I mean, they can always do a Sri Lanka. So what they can do, and then they've got a great scapegoat too. They can, assuming that the Chinese still have an appetite for this, and they may not. The money is not flowing as freely as it used to. But one of the things that one could do, given their context, is that they can go beg a bunch of loans from the Chinese, become even bigger rah-rahs for the Belt and Road Initiative, have the Chinese then take the burden of building this. Of course, the Chinese are going to import their own workers, et cetera, which is going to cause some rioting, but that employs the security forces. And then they get this thing built. The South Africans can't pay. They default. This is, again, the Sri Lankan experience. And then the Chinese take over the power grid. If the Chinese are willing to do this. But burned once, twice shy. They've got a substantial amount of flack for taking over the port in Sri Lanka, which began to look, or was easily used by the enemies of Chinese to suggest that while China despised the British colonization and taking of the port of Hong Kong, they had no qualms about doing the same thing in Sri Lanka. Yeah, that's bad.
The optics. Yes, the optics of that at this time, I'm not sure.
But it may not matter. It may not matter.
Yeah,
they may be able to finesse it. But that certainly is one of the outcomes, right? And that is that, yeah, you're not going to privatize this, and you're certainly not going to give it to this cozy nepotism and kind of, gosh, this really smells transfer to a family member. But you can transfer it to a significantly important apex power who'd be willing to do it eventually, and that would be the Chinese. The Americans, interestingly enough, are nowhere to be found, and the Europeans, whose mess this was, at least originally, given their what in retrospect might have been poorly conceived, although at the time not particularly problematic decision making at the end of the 19th and early 20th century. This is their mess. One doesn't see them eager to clean this up, but that's because in Europe, having spent a century committing suicide, in a sense, has very little to offer other than moralizing and regulatory capacity. That was mean,
Yeah.
but not
Whoa, a little
tremendously
catty
mean.
today, are
Yeah.
we?
Well, I mean, you feel for folks, it's nice to have this discussion in a room that's heated with electricity, in a relatively stable political and well, forget that, the
Yeah,
economic environment.
there you go.
But you know that
Maybe.
there are tens of millions of South Africans who want nothing more than to be able to turn their lights on, basic governmental services. And yet the South Africans have made it impossible for this to happen, in effect, to some large extent, by their own hand. And you got to feel for the population who is then, I guess, you can't gaslight where there's no electricity, because there's no gas. That was another bad dad joke. But you're doling out to the masses, and this seems to be the way of the 21st century, in the face of massive incompetence, in the face of massive corruption and the like. The thing that seems to be the go-to for many states is the idea that you must sacrifice for us and for the future. And so the discursive tropes of sacrificing for the nation is another sign of corruption, but is being used. And there is a time and place for this, and it's a very powerful discourse. But one wonders whether it's really appropriate in this case to tell the population to suck it up. We can't really tell you whose fault it is, except it's all our faults, by all of us, I mean the administration, over the course of almost a generation. But hey, suck it up.
Yeah, and we don't have a
And
solution for
that's
you.
cruel.
Yeah. It's incredible.
It's cruel. On the other hand, there's an opportunity here. I want to end on a positive note. At
Right.
least my
Let's
thoughts
do
on this.
that.
I want to end on a positive note. To some extent, there's an opportunity here, and this is a missed opportunity both for the Euros and for the Americans. In the face of the current state of the grid, the South African grid is primed for leaping a generation of technology and moving towards really robust use of what currently is called alternative, but within 10 or 15 years is going to be baseline power generation sourcing, solar, hydro, and stuff that I don't even know. And now would be the time, if we're really looking at this as a global community, each helping the other, invoking modern technologies to leapfrog, especially developing states forward. Now would be the time not to spend a ton of money to build more coal or petroleum or gas plants or even nuclear plants, but it may be worthwhile in the face of the crisis. And perhaps this is a joint U.S.-China thing. While the Chinese are loaning them money to keep their current grid up, the Americans and the Europeans can be investing in and modeling post-petroleum and perhaps post-nuclear grid infrastructures, electric grid infrastructures in South Africa. And unfortunately, I suspect that none of this is going to be done. It would be a great model, because if you can perfect it in South Africa where they really need it and they're willing to take the risk, you have then a much more efficient reapplication back into the OECD heartland. Europe, the Japanese are doing better than most of us, but Europe and the United States. So
Honestly,
that's my positive note.
you probably have better luck with someone with a lot of money in America, like a Bill Gates or an Elon Musk, convincing.
Well, he just blew $44 billion on Twitter.
But doesn't mean he
playing
still
word
doesn't
games.
have money.
Oh my Lord, yes. So let's go diamond encrusted golden cups to Mr. Gates and all the other billionaires
Hey,
who will give us a penny or something.
don't act like Gates hasn't already gone places and
Yeah,
um
yeah, he's done things to suit himself and to suit the needs and in influence augmenting trajectories
so we
of
could make this worth his while
these
as well.
these foundational empires. But maybe that's a subject for another podcast.
All
Maybe
right.
we can figure out a way of inducing these people to be a little less self-serving and to use their charities more proactively, other than as a mirror. I feel like the beginning of Snow White, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the plumpest, most wonderfulest philanthropist of them all.
Well,
But that's another podcast. Anyway,
or like I said, you just learn how to give them what they want.
all right, next podcast. In the meantime, this really is a nice case study and a very sad one, a tragic one, on how you can take something that was reasonably working and through a combination of all kinds of structural and discretionary decision making and the weakness in a state that had the potential for capacity to just then blow it all. And then even worse, the absolute horror of this is that the administrative bureaucracy in South Africa has been far more effective in figuring out ways to excuse it and to develop this new vocabulary of shedding, et cetera, et cetera. And they appear to spend more time on the mechanics of this kind of discursive trope than they did on actually fixing and augmenting the power grid itself, which is a commentary on our times as well. Woof, woof.
Bark, bark. Thanks
Until
everyone
next
for listening, and we'll see you next time.